welcome back to Let's Talk. My name is John, and today here on the channel, we are going to be talking about Trading Places and its new 4K Blu-ray that just came out from Paramount. So Trading Places was released 40 years ago, if you can believe that, back in 1983. It stars Eddie Murphy and Dan Aykroyd in the two leading roles, and it's directed by John Landis, who had a great working relationship with Eddie Murphy until, unfortunately, coming to America, and then their relationship kind of fell apart. Until Beverly Hills Cop 3, they kind of made up a little bit and made a terrible movie together. But we still got Trading Places. This is Eddie Murphy's second movie only after 48 hours. He was still raw and very young, but what a talent he was. He was carrying SNL on his back at the time.
In the neighborhood, a beautiful day for a neighbor. Would you be mine?
He was one of the funniest people on the planet, and you teamed him up with Dan Aykroyd. Now, this film was originally written for Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor, and you can see that on the screen. Those two also had a great working relationship in the late 1970s and the early 1980s.
Could I please? Wait a minute, I'm not a troublemaker.
But after that, they passed it on to Dan Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy, and I really think they got the casting perfect. Eddie Murphy is always hysterical, and it's nice to see that we're getting all of his films now on beautiful 4K Blu-ray. But Dan Aykroyd doesn't really get the appreciation he deserves for how long he's been working. He started on SNL in the 70s.
Jane, you ignorant slut.
And then he became most famous for Ghostbusters 1 year after this film in 1984, which is a big ensemble cast. But when it comes to acting chops, Dan Aykroyd doesn't get the appreciation he deserves. And John Landis even said that himself. He's like, he's a great actor. He just doesn't get the looks, mainly because he also only had one starring role before this movie, and it flopped hard. So unfortunately, the studios had no faith in him anymore. Once you have one flop, that's it. You're out the door. And it's funny, we're talking about a movie here about rich people just doing whatever the hell they want. They don't give a shit about humanity. That's the whole point of this movie, is how they're just willing to make a $1 bet.
Here, $1.
And ruin two people's lives at the same exact time for their own entertainment. That's the whole point of this movie, and to bring Dan Aykroyd in and portray, because I think he has the better arc. So before I get a little too ahead of myself, the plot of this movie is Eddie Murphy, he plays just a kind of a low-life scumbag. He's just kind of ripping people off to try and get by. He doesn't have a lot of money. He's doing the best he can. He's trying to just live his life the best he possibly can. He's got a hard life. Meanwhile, Dan Aykroyd has been pampered, taken care of his entire life. Everything has just always worked out for this guy. He's got the two best bosses taking care of him. Even if they don't give a shit about him, he still lives in their house. He's got all the money in the world. He's got a great fiance who we think loves him, but she just really loves the money. So he's got the good life, and he's an asshole on top of that. He treats everybody terrible, especially poor people. He just looks down at everybody, you know, especially his butler, even though by the end of the movie, they do redeem that relationship. But the way he's like, oh, you can eat my dessert, he just like throws his hand up at him like, okay, well, you're a dick. I mean, how do you treat somebody like that? And it's funny because the butler's just like, you could just see it in his face like, I fucking hate you, but I get it. I need this job. But eventually the Duke brothers, they just get really bored. They want to see if they can have Winthrop Lewis III, swap him out with Billy D. Valentine. We're going to put Dan Aykroyd out in the street, kick him out of his home. Again, I don't know how he doesn't raise more questions about this. We kick him out of his house, put him in the streets, just try and let him live the rest of his life. We don't give a shit about him. We want to see if he turns to crime. And then we bring Eddie Murphy in, see if we can groom him to be exactly what we want, basically turn him into Winthrop. And they kind of do, but again, this is why I think Dan Aykroyd has the better arc in this movie, because at the very beginning of this movie, he is a piece of shit. He's got prejudices. I'm pretty sure he's a little bit racist. He looks down on everyone from his throne, like everyone should be kissing his feet. So when he gets thrown out in the streets and, you know, he's walking around in that disgusting Santa Claus suit, eating fish out of the pocket, just gross, becoming an alcoholic. Thank God Jamie Lee Curtis, who was actually not supposed to be in this movie, you know, John Landis had to really, like, get her. They didn't want her. They only saw her as a horror actor. And at this point, that's all she really was. We're only 5 years removed from Halloween. But he brought in Jamie Lee Curtis. This is actually the first time she ever cut her hair because they really wanted to accent those cheekbones. And she's been having that look ever since this movie, and I really think it works for her. Not many people, but Jamie Lee Curtis is one of the most beautiful people on this planet, can pull that look off, and she really does. And she's there really, she plays the lovable hooker. She's there to basically pick up Dan Aykroyd off his feet, dust him off, and, you know, gain his confidence back. Turn him into a better person as well, because Jamie Lee Curtis has a heart of gold in this movie. And I know for a lot of people, not me though, but for a lot of people, this was the first time they ever got to see their set of boobs, was in this movie actually, because I think this is one of the most famous nude scenes in film history. They even bring it up in Scream, how Jamie Lee Curtis doesn't get naked in Halloween. She doesn't take her clothes off until Trading Places in 1983. Jamie Kennedy makes sure to bring that up, and I know a lot of people this was their first experience with a nude scene, and I can understand that. I'm a little bit younger, so this wasn't it for me. I think it was probably American Pie. But at the end of the day, both Dan Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy, they realized that they're being shammed.
Was the Dukes. It was the Dukes.
You're a dead man, Valentine!
And they have to get their revenge on the Duke brothers, and they sure as hell do. Now, I don't really understand the whole finances of this movie. I don't understand why frozen concentrated orange juice is being traded like this. I just have no idea why that's a thing. Why are you allowed to bet on the market or just be able to predict and bet on the market? It doesn't make sense to me. It kind of feels like you're playing with everybody else's money, which they pretty much are. That's just what rich people do on this planet. Unfortunately, they don't give a shit about anyone else but themselves. Again, that's what this movie is trying to show you. And the Duke brothers, who were played by Don Amici and Ralph Bellamy, both of them doing a great job. At the end of the movie, they're doing a little bit of overacting, but I absolutely love it. You can just tell that these two older actors are finally having a good time. You know, they're classically trained actors, and they're just here to have a great time, act against Dan Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy. And you can see that they had a good time because John Landis brought them back for Coming to America. You know, they get the money back, and they're like,
Mortimer, we're back.
so I just absolutely love this movie. Everyone is doing a great job. It's one of those classic comedies from the 1980s. It's not my favorite from anybody involved in this movie. It's not my favorite Dan Aykroyd movie. It's not my favorite Eddie Murphy movie. Definitely not my favorite Jamie Lee Curtis movie. And it's also not my favorite John Landis movie. So, you know, it's a great movie, but it doesn't have that special connection to me like a lot of other Eddie Murphy movies. You know, this is one that I will probably go back to like every 3 or 4 years. I'll revisit it. You know, it's kind of like an alternate Christmas classic because about a third of the movie, Dan Aykroyd is wearing the world's dirtiest Santa Claus suit. So it's kind of a Christmas movie. It takes place during Christmas time. But again, like a lot of movies around the 1980s, Christmas is just in the background. It's not really a big important part of the movie. But around this time of the year, it's definitely worth your time, especially since the snow is on the ground in Philadelphia. And it's got that northeast feeling that I just absolutely love. So it's definitely worth your time. If you've never seen this John Landis film, you'll probably get some laughs out of it. And, you know, obviously there's a scene where Dan Aykroyd puts blackface on. I've heard that he regrets it, and he really should regret it because that's just in very, very poor taste. And there are some jokes in this movie that haven't aged well. It's a 1983 film. It's 40 years ago. If you remember Eddie Murphy's stand-up, Raw and Delirious from back in the day, you know, he had some jokes that just haven't aged well. Again, he's apologized for that at this point, but, you know, it's the 80s. We have to understand it's a different time. You can't get offended by it. It was just the time. But, you know, the blackface thing, we all know that hasn't aged well. But if you want to check this film out, you can check it out on this new 4K Blu-ray that just came out that we're going to talk about right now. But before we do that, if you want to continue to support this channel, nothing supports the channel out more than just by you liking this video, subscribing to the channel, or you can become a channel member. All you got to do is click that join button or click the link in the description below, but it's absolutely no pressure. And without further ado, let's talk about this 4K. Well, here it is, Trading Places on 4K Blu-ray. This was actually the second 4K to come out from Paramount in the very same week. They also put out Scrooge. So it's pretty strange that they put out two 4Ks in very similar packaging, although this one has 2 discs while Scrooge only had 1 disc. And the reason I think is because back in 2020, December of 2020, Paramount's Presents put out this film, and I think that's the last time it received a new scan. I'm pretty sure that the scan that's in here is that same scan, just with HDR Dolby Vision over it, because nothing else is new, and they actually pack in that Paramount's Presents Blu-ray into here, so all of your extras are going to be on that. All the audio tracks are the same, so all you're really receiving is a visual upgrade. And I think that's why they were able to put out Scrooge and Trading Places in the very same week. And the scans are also very different. So before I get ahead of myself, let's look at the packaging, because I do think the packaging is really nice. You know, you kind of got this glossy slip cover where things kind of like just bounce at you. The money is like kind of flying at you. Really like what they did with this slip cover here. You know, you get the same artwork underneath, so nothing too special there. It is Paramount, so when you go inside, you're going to get a black 4K and a blue Blu-ray. If it is 2 discs, it's always going to be the blue Blu-ray. And like I said, that's the Paramount Presents line. So it's only been 3 years, and I've seen Paramount do this in the past where they like take their Paramount Presents Blu-rays and they bring them to 4K, but they don't upgrade them to 4K and keep it under the Paramount Presents line name. For some reason, I have no idea. I think it's for marketing purposes, because if you have the Trading Places on Blu-ray from the Paramount Presents line, you're probably not going to notice them upgrading it to 4K. So I think that they changed the packaging around, rearranged how they name it, because they still have the Paramount Presents line. This very week, I'm going to be reviewing Terms of Endearment on 4K Blu-ray, and that's under the Paramount Presents line. Paramount Paramount Presents line has also released movies on 4K, so it's very strange how they do it. I assume it's just Paramount trying to make a little bit more money and just kind of deceive people who are like looking at it going, oh, I want to upgrade that. And they might not be aware that it's pretty much the same scan, all the same extras. So if you do look at it and you're comparing the Blu-ray that's packed in here, that Paramount Presents Blu-ray, to the 4K, it has a lot of the same issues that the Paramount Presents line had. It's just really turning up the brightness, I think the brightness, and also it does clear up a lot of the color issues from that Paramount Presents Blu-ray, which I do think is kind of flawed, but that also means that this 4K is kind of flawed. It has scenes that just look absolutely gorgeous. Like in the second half of the movie, Dan Aykroyd, he's standing outside, it's raining out. Great sound design, by the way, the HD 5.1 on here. It really, really is good. They really make good use of the channels, not throughout the entire film, but a lot of time, like when it's raining, you might hear the rain coming from behind you. So I thought they mixed the track very, very, very well, especially for a 1980s film like this. You would have been forgiven if it wasn't as good as it is. So I like a lot of Paramount Blu-rays and 4Ks I like to talk about. There is a good amount of accessibility options here as far as languages when it comes to audio tracks and with subtitles. Not as much as other Paramount films, but there's still a good amount. And like I said, the audio track is great. But back to those visuals. So when Dan Aykroyd's standing outside in the rain, he's got the dirty suit on. Like the red on his Santa suit is supposed to look faded and dirty, but it's definitely a lot more noticeable now. Oh, you know, Dan Aykroyd, a lot of the movie, he's got a 5 o'clock shadow, just looking an absolute mess. And the 4K is going to actually make those skin tones look a lot more natural. But unfortunately, there's some interiors, especially early in the movie, where Dan Aykroyd, you know, he's first getting shaved at the very beginning of the movie, and that stuff just looks, I don't want to say bad, but it doesn't look great. And you have a lot of those issues, but I noticed it more in the first half than on the second half of the 4K. So like in the first half, I was noticing a lot more flaws, but it looks like they kind of cleaned it up. Maybe they just had better set design, better lighting, you know, better source material at this point, and that's why it's just a very uneven 4K in my opinion. It's not bad. It's still an upgrade over that Paramount Presents line Blu-ray, but it's also not something that's going to blow you away. And if you have that Paramount Presents Blu-ray, I also don't see any reason for you to upgrade, mainly because all you're getting is a visual upgrade, and it's not one that's going to blow you away. It's good, it's an upgrade, but it's not something that is great and necessary. Given it's only $19.99 for this 4K Blu-ray, and if you are a big fan of the film, you might want to grab it. Plus, all the extras are the same that are on that Paramount Presents Blu-ray, but because I didn't own them, I really love the extras. There's like an 8-minute interview with John Landis that's looking back on the film that I just absolutely loved. There's also a making-of documentary that they put on here, but then they also have featurettes that were clearly filmed at the same time as that making-of documentary that they could have edited into that, but they wanted to make the list of extras look a little bit longer. There's also a great extra in here that John Landis introduces where he's talking about, you know, back in the day, they still kind of do this now. I think it's called CinemaCon, where in Las Vegas you kind of present the films that are coming out from the studios to all of the theater executives in the audience at the time. And they were shooting this movie, and Paramount wanted to get some footage for them, and unfortunately they didn't have anything done, so basically they brought Dan Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy into a men's room, had them make a bunch of jokes and improv with each other, which is really, really funny. You should check that out, actually. It's kind of like them making fun of Hollywood executives, so I really enjoyed that. So basically they just did this in 2 days. They shot it, sent it to Technicolor, edited it all together, and then they presented this to all of the theater executives in the audience, and I think that that's just absolutely hysterical. Apparently John Landis had this, so only people who ever saw this until that Paramount Presents line were the theater executives and John Landis. He had it in a shoebox at his house for 20 years or something like that. So or I guess it was more than that, almost 40 years. And finally we get to see it. It's absolutely hysterical. It's a very short featurette, but it's just one that I love. So the extras on here, they are really, really good. The visual upgrade isn't the best. The audio is really good. The packaging is really good. So overall, at $19.99, it's definitely worth your money. I would say that honestly, if you can get it on a sale for about $10 to $15, it's definitely better there. And if you have that Paramount Presents Blu-ray, I would recommend you just hanging on to that. Unless you're a huge fan of this film, and I know there are people, then I could say, hey, you know what? You might want to see it in 4K. It's definitely an upgrade. It's just not something that's going to blow you away. So how would I score this on a score of 1 to 10? I would still give Trading Places on 4K Blu-ray a pretty solid 8 out of 10. And anyway, guys, thank you so much for being here with me on another episode of Let's Talk. I want to thank my channel producers, John Doe Juggalo, Frank Rodriguez, and Jason Martin, and my channel director, Kevin Kruger. If you guys want to join the ranks with them, we have channel memberships. You can click the link in the description below, click that join button, see which tier is best for you and which perks work for you. But if you don't have the money to throw our way, that's no problem at all. It's absolutely no pressure. Just hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and then just get out in those streets and tell your friends about us. We will be seeing you around.